Uh, I actually gave a lecture yesterday in Denmark, and so I'm glad we'll get to have a conversation. For those of you who ever presented in Denmark, you know what I mean by giving a lecture. I'm glad that we had two-way dialogue during the earlier session, so it'll make this a lot more fun, not only for you, but also for me. One of the things that, just so you know a little bit about my background, come more from an academic background and approach things from more of a theoretical perspective. At Hogan, we are a research-based organization. We focus on personality and how personality impacts performance, how performance impacts organizational life and organizational quality for individuals, and how individuals drive the bottom line. And so for everything we do, there is a evidence-based factor, evidence-based data supporting things that we do, things that we say, things that we publish. So with that, everything that we talk about today, while there may be fun stories or good one-liners, everything that we talk about is data-based. And that's something unique in the marketplace for us. For us though, engagement's critical. Engagement's critical to the success of organizations. Engagement's critical for people to be happy in their jobs. And that's really what I want to talk about today, and specifically want to talk about how do you drive engagement through better leadership, and how do we start with the fundamental base of better leadership, and that is through identifying the right personality-based characteristics of leaders. So we'll build on a few concepts today. We'll build on the concepts that people's lives and the happiness in their lives depend on their careers. Why is that? Well, we spend 70% of our adult life working. Let's face that, today it may even be more, depending upon the country in which you live or the situation that you find yourself in. It may not be in your primary place of employment. In the States where I live, we have 80-year-olds now working in Walmart greeting you when you walk in. They were retired 20 years ago, but they're back working because they have to pay their medical bills or to pay whatever bills they may have or their children have. And so for them, they never thought about working that far into their lives, but they still are. Second is the quality of their careers specifically depend on the success of their organizations. From that standpoint, then the organizations depend upon the leadership that's in those organizations and that's responsible for making those organizations run smoothly. So we'll tie all these things together, but bottom line, it comes down to personality, leadership, and engagement is really linked around the effectiveness of the people that are in the organization. And then my one snippet of the day, personality is the underlying theme here, and Karl Marx was just wrong, and that is when we think about personality, when we think about leadership, we're talking about an evolutionary view of personality and performance, not a revolutionary view. So when we think about personal investment in the organization, let's look at it from a couple of perspectives. Why do we want to talk about effective organizations, or why does effectiveness really matter? Well, evolutionary theory shows us that the strongest and most effective individuals start to survive and start to thrive. People's futures are going to depend upon the doors being opened. When you walked up to the hotel here this afternoon, you expected the door downstairs to be open, right? It's a newer property in town. You didn't expect to have any problems coming upstairs. You expected the coffee machine to work. That's because we expect newer, better things to constantly function. Well, that's the same thing with your employees. They expect your organizations to continue to run. They depend on it for their livelihood. So again, we focus on the competition, though, between groups as psychologists. Group survival, though, trumps individual survival. One of the bottom line issues, though, is what's good for the group is not always good for the individual. So when we think about the discussion from earlier in coaching, some of the things that we hear people coaching around is you have to set aside your individual goals, sometimes for those of the team, sometimes those for the organization. Having a conversation with a 20 or 30-year-old that they may have to momentarily push pause on their own career ambitions for the betterment of the group, the betterment of the team, is a very difficult conversation to have, especially when you're talking to someone who's been recruited from a top school around the world. So think a little bit about it, reflect on some of those conversations you may have had to have. The other question we also get asked a lot is, why does personality matter? Hogan, why do you focus so much on personality? The first question I'd have for you today, and this is part of the audience participation part, Think real quickly. In the last century, how many people have died because of natural disasters just around the world? So tsunamis, earthquakes, floods, fires. How many people do you think have died? Just think of that number. I mean, it's a pretty bleak thing to think about. Way to start the mood off, right, Ryan? Got a number? Okay. I really don't care about your number. Think about it this way. Why does personality matter? Well, people are the most dangerous and consequential species on the planet. In the last 100 years, 167 million people have been killed for political reasons. 137 million people have died by the hands of their own government, and only 30 million people have been killed by invading armies. As in, it really does matter who's in charge. Okay, it's a function of personality. Human beings are really dangerous people. Now, let's take that back to the organizational context. Again, it really does matter who's in charge if you want to talk about engagement and organizational effectiveness. A couple of things about that. Personality psychology, we study the nature of human nature. It's why you do what you do. You won't hear from us or you won't hear from me today about traits or about this or that. We care about why you do what you do, not about what's the innate little thing that's inside your brain that says, I'm impulsive. I don't care why you're impulsive. I care about what that predicts. What do I need to do to coach you around things that you can do to modify your behavior? Because I'm not going to ultimately change who you are. I'm going to give you techniques that help you improve who you are. And then finally, what do we know about personality? We know that people oftentimes try to take the field and twist it in their own way. And so what we want to do is we want to bring it back to how it ties to improving organizational effectiveness and actually driving overall performance. People say, well, what does that have to do with the commonplace? What do people really think about personality? Well, why don't you take a look at what it says when you ask people out on the streets in New York.
Personality. The overall.
What's personality? Very diverse thing, I would say.
It's interesting.
How do you define personality? What's your definition? Anyone?
A set of traits that makes the person who they are and what you experience at the outside.
Okay, what you experience from the outside. I'm gonna hold on to those words right there. What else do you think of when I say, what is personality? Certain values, good. What else?
Who you are and how you show up.
I'm sorry? Yeah.
Who you are and how you show up.
Who you are and how you show up. Okay. Someone else had
It's like the core of someone's being.
the core of someone's being. Okay.
What drives you?
What drives you? So we're getting into who you are, how you appear, values, what drives you, your core. You know, what's really interesting about personality is it truly is some universal themes. We take what we call a socioanalytic approach to defining personality. And the socioanalytic approach really thinks about personality and defining personality in terms of really getting along, getting ahead, and creating meaning in life or some stability. And so personality exists in a state of social interaction. Okay, so right now we're engaged in social interaction. You're doing a really good job sitting there acting like you care and you're interested. And I'm doing a pretty good job acting like I really care about talking to you. Okay, that's social interaction. We're both playing a part. Okay, the point is, you have to have two people and they both have to have a part. But it's about getting along and getting ahead. And so when you think about things from that perspective, that those tendencies, we build our reputation over time. And so when we think about personality and we think about individual differences, some people that you've interacted with are better at one of those characteristics than another. Some people are really good at getting ahead, and some people are really good at getting along. But in an organization, we ask people to do them both equally as well. And that creates tension because sometimes I have to, as a leader, get along and also try to get ahead, which means sometimes stepping on people. Or not necessarily just, crushing them truly on the ground, but perhaps, prioritizing my needs versus theirs. Or I may need to get along and deprioritize my needs. The other thing, and the reason why I stopped a couple of you with your words, we define personality from two different perspectives. There's the you that you know, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations. When you get up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror, you probably have one of two reactions. Whoa, it's going to be a good day, look at me. Or you could be like most of us and it's, oh my gosh, what did I do last night? This is going to take some work, but it'll be okay. There's what you call your identity. It's the you that you know. It's that inner core, it's that inner talk that you have. The challenge with your identity is it's only the you that you know. You can't really explain it. It's really hard to measure. It's very unreliable for us as other individuals to try to get at. Then there's what we call your reputation. It's the you that we know. It's the you that shows up day in and day out in organizational life and society, when you're out with friends, when you're out on the street. It's what we call your reputation because it's what precedes you as well. Reputation's actually very easy to measure. All I have to do is pass out an adjective checklist. So all of you know Julie fairly well. I could simply pass out a sheet of paper that has 20 adjectives on it and say, please check the box next to the words that describe Julie. And what I would get in a very quick amount of time in this room with the 35 or 40 people in the room, I would get about a 95% agreement on those adjective checklists of Julie's reputation. That's a proxy for what we would call her personality. So it would be charming, smart, interactive, ingratiating. So what you're finding is people are being measured based on who they present themselves to be. So when we think about who you are, we're talking about someone's reputation. There was a great line that Freud had, and that is, he cares much less about the you that you know versus the you that we know. And that's because the you that you know, you just make up every day. So when we think about reputation, that's really what we're talking about, your personality from a reputational perspective. From a coaching standpoint, and how does that tie to coaching? Reputation is hard to change. Some people will say, well, I'll just change my behavior. Well, that's great. You can work on changing your behavior, but it takes time. You've got to be very consistent because what do we immediately do as humans? We look for inconsistencies in behavior. As a team, when I'm talking to a leader that says, well, I'm just going to do this differently. Well, it's not that they just have to do it one time or two times differently in a team meeting. They've got to do it repetitively because the team's just looking for a slight regression before it's, aha, see, you weren't serious about changing. So again, modifying reputation is not just a light switch event. What's leadership? So if we're going to talk about personality and leadership and how that eventually ties to engagement, what's leadership? If you go to I spend a lot of time in airports, you go to an airport bookstore, there's really two big sections of books. There's the leadership book section, and then there's the self-help section, and for some reason they're right next to each other. I mean, talk about an oxymoron. And what's so funny about the leadership literature is there's two traditions. There's what we call the troubadour tradition, which is the books written by the self-proclaimed experts and ex-CEOs. So, leadership lessons of Genghis Khan and things like that. They're very entertaining, and it's great. It's great information. Michael Dell on Dell. Great information. But trivial, because these are once-in-a-lifetime often experiences and stories, things that can't just be taken and plopped down, at Philips Healthcare or at Exxon or Shell or at wherever it may be, because of the size of the organization and the situation they find them in. The other books are more academic-based, and so what they will tell you is that successful leaders in Asia are shorter than, right here. Or they wear size shoes that are, 5.5s. Stuff that, yes, it's fact and it's correlational data, but it really doesn't tell us anything except I guess we should go search for short people with small feet. So again, we're left with having to evaluate these findings from a very nonsensical manner. And so what that leads us with is not much from either tradition. So again, I think what we're left with is trying to look back at history and let history drive what does it mean to be an effective leader. I thought what we'd do is let's have a couple of experts in the field. So I thought I'd have Bob Hogan, Warner Burke, and then Tomas Chamorro Premuzic just tell you just in about 35 seconds what they think about leadership.
Warfare was the most important factor driving human evolution. It was a matter of whether or not we as a group can defeat the animals that are trying to kill us, if not the other people across the river, human beings like us who are trying to get the resources they think we have.
So it's a time when you've got these groups living in the forest in competition for one another, and the competition is quite deadly. You're living here, they're living there. They at some point decide they like your resources better than their resources. They come to get your resources. They don't come with their lawyers. They come, to get it. And if they're successful, they don't just take your resources away from you, they kill you, and they eat you. And if you're someone else's dinner, that means you disappear from the gene pool, and there goes your reproductive success.
But I think probably what evolved was something that we refer to as leadership. Some of the people in the group were much more skilled at being able to help us to survive than others. And so we tended to follow those that seemed to know more about what the hell they were doing than just any of us.
That's why leadership is so important. It's a fundamental resource for the group, for the survival and the effectiveness of teams.
So how do you define leadership? What kind of words do you use to define leadership? Whether it be in your organization or when you're talking about it with a coachee, and you say, let me give you a few examples, or let me give you a few words that summarizes my view of effective leadership. What do you say? Okay.
Once you get them started.
So let me ask you, let me guess, you want somebody with all of these? No. Okay. That's right. You know what's really interesting when we ask groups to do this, and a lot of times the way that we approach this is we'll actually give leadership teams these definitions, but we'll do it on index cards. And we'll ask them to start sorting piles. It's a traditional card sort. And you start sorting, and what they don't see you do is actually act like a magician, and you start just with a sleight of hand pulling decks off the table. And before long, they start losing words and definitions in their stack that you're being asked to sort. And you come down to a critical stack, and that's when the conversation gets tough. But they start to realize and recognize there's certain things that either are counterproductive or just not as critical. Just real quick, and we won't have time to talk about all of them, but what if any were things that your group just immediately went to that said, this is non-negotiable, we have to have this, full stop, period, end of story? Any things that were just, this has got to be it? Stress tolerance? I've got stress tolerance, team building, teamwork, building relationships, influence.
I want targets. I would put targets in. It's so great to have a warm relationship, but where is it going to end you as a business?
Yeah.
You have to set draw lines.
I think that's what's so interesting is a lot of times people start to debate, and it's influence, building relationships, social interaction type things at the senior leadership level where you get a lot of debate of what drives engagement the most. Is it I'm going to be your friend, your mentor, I'm going to have this relationship with you, or I'm going to drive results, but I'm going to do it in an appropriate way through proper influence. And can those be one and the same? And I think that's an interesting question to think about over the course of time. The purpose of this is simply that you're going to find as you work with different leaders, different competencies start to emerge. Different competencies are necessary for different roles. Not everyone is going to perform at the same or proficient levels at different places in their career. We do a lot of work in high potential identification and talent management. If you look at Colin's work, if you look at the leadership pipeline model, just because they score lower on certain competencies early in their career does not mean that as they move up in the organizational hierarchy or as they move from a level 1 to a level 3 leader, that their performance in those competencies does not increase or they do not find themselves performing much better based on organizational structure, the supporting leadership they have around them, and or their time or experience. It's basically, we talk about percolating them in the system and also letting their personality-based characteristics start to come to life along the way through their training and experience.
Would it be fair to say that some of the most successful leaders in the world are seriously falling short of the balance? So if you look at someone like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs,
You take,
those people are seriously lopsided when it comes to their strength. I mean, they're very far from balanced.
most definitely, you look at people like a Steve Jobs and you look at the anomalies, of someone who, he's our poster child for the anomaly leader. And the stories that come out of walking into to the R&D department, and there was a whole article written of an administrative assistant that had M&Ms in a glass jar and dumps the glass jar on the desk, picks out the blue ones, and then just walks off. For her to clean up the rest of the M&Ms because he wanted the blue ones. I mean, what kind of example does that set as in an organization? I mean, we're all, but at the same point, and people talk about other leaders that, Jack Welch, he did a great job insulating the rest of the organization. In one of his talks, he talked about how he had 12 people that insulated him from the rest of the organization. And he had an effective way of communicating with those other senior leaders, but he spent very little time out operationally in the field because he knew the limitations of his strengths and he knew and he identified his challenges and his shortcomings. So he had what we called strategic self-awareness. He also had what we call good judgment. He knew when to make the right decisions. He knew when to correct the decisions that he had made because he was in tune with the data that was coming in, and he didn't let his personality get in the way of not taking action and admitting we need to change course or change direction. Yes?
So when we say effective leadership depends on success, and success can be different for every person, for every team, for every company, can we then still say that there are universal characteristics of effective leadership?
I think you can definitely say that there are what I call red threads that run through effective leaders. You have anomalies like a Steve Jobs, where despite themselves. Well, I think just when you look at the behaviors, that made him who he was, an organization's willingness to tolerate certain behaviors for so long became part of their culture. You talk about certain organizations, and I can name many of them in the States that we've worked with and worked for, where they talk about wanting to change the culture of accepting such rough and just, really mean-spirited leaders. In fact, they call it, we want to get rid of the assholes. We don't want to hire any more assholes, is what one organization talks about. And it's just because it's become such an accepted practice, they don't even bat an eye, but yet they realize that's impacting their engagement with the next generation of employees that are coming in. The next generation of employees that they're trying to hire won't tolerate that behavior. And so for them, what they're seeing is their next crop of high potentials are leaving. And they're leaving and they're saying, we're leaving because it's so acidic working here. But yet for years, that derailment, as we talk about at Hogan, that culture of derailment has become acceptable in that organization. Not focusing the competitiveness on the outside, but rather focusing all the competitiveness on the inside, as an example. There are key characteristics, though, of effective leaders that go across organizations. But there are certain things in each organization that lets you excel within a certain company. A lot of times it's based on values and drivers, based on the culture of that organization that'll make you more successful in one place than another. What about judgment? How people process information, the decision-making approach that people have, and their reactions to feedback are key in the way that we think about how personality and leadership drives engagement in an organization. Before you walked in the room today, you probably made about 500 or 600 decisions. You don't realize that, but if you sit back and think about it, you made a decision to get out of bed. You made a decision to comb your hair, to brush your teeth. You made decisions since the moment you woke up this morning. I hope most of those were good decisions. You probably also made some bad decisions today already. Whether that be a conversation you had with somebody on your team, whether that was a decision not to call back a certain customer because you wanted to avoid a conversation, or you maybe had a conversation that you now regret and think right now, wow, I should have handled that a little bit differently. The interesting part about all those thoughts that you have about your decisions is they're moderated by who you are, by your personality, by your personality characteristics. When we think about decision making and we think about the way people make decisions, we break it down into three things. The way that you process information, and that is some people process information in a more verbal manner or in a more numeric manner. So more traditional cognitive ability. Am I a numbers person or am I a verbal person? Some people are balanced in that approach. If we know from a leadership perspective which a person prefers, we can help, or we can in fact feed to them the type of information that they're going to best deal with in terms of making decisions. The second thing we know about people is their decision-making approach. And that is, most of us tend to approach making decisions in either a threat avoidance or a reward-seeking approach or a manner. That is, we're trying to reduce the opportunity for failure or increase the opportunity for success. It's that mindset. I hate to liken it back to is the glass half full or half empty, but that's basically what we're talking about. The decision I'm going to make, is it going to get me in trouble or is it going to cause me to be more successful? We also think about it from a tactical or strategic standpoint. Am I working on the business or am I working in the business? And that's an important concept, especially as a leader starts to mature in the organization. They need to spend less time working with the nuts and bolts and the daily activities and daily tasks and thinking on a more strategic level in the organization, and then being more data-driven or intuitive-based in their decision-making style. When we think about information processing and decision-making approaches, this is great information for an individual to have. I think the most exciting part of judgment, and we think about how judgment drives employee engagement, is around their reactions to feedback. More so, it's become acceptable for employees to actually have conversations with their managers around their decision-making. Around, hey, boss, this didn't go so well, or this decision wasn't correct. What are we going to do about it? You're hearing more and more of those conversations as you walk around. The challenge is, what's the response? And we categorize it in terms of being defensive versus cool-headed, denial versus accepting, or being superficial versus genuine. The reaction that a leader has to their team when the team says, we made a bad decision, really helps them understand very quickly the type of leader they're going to be working for in the future and the type of conversations that they can have going forward. How much does the leader really buy in a genuine manner to the conversation and to the performance of the team, what the team's trying to accomplish?
I've had bosses who were not always there for me when I needed something. So it seemed every time I was trying to make money for the company or make a deal, they were trying to stop it so that I didn't move ahead in the company because my bosses were afraid I would get their job. Or sat down and took an idea from me and then gave it to the boss as their idea. I mean, those are bad bosses.
We're driving around, and he saw sandbags on the side of the street. They were obviously left from a recent festival to be picked up by the sandbagging company. And he stopped and said, "Hit quick, help me load these up. I need sandbags."
And your name's Ryan, right?
Yeah.
Hi, Ryan. You've done a good job today. I just want to thank you for coming into work today. And, how's the life? Great. Okay. So thank you very much. And, I noticed that you left at 4:55 the other day, and, the document that you left, there wasn't a lot of people were talking about it. You were 5 minutes early, so I have a good weekend.
You know what?
Yeah.
It's about judgment because, judgment drives engagement. And engagement is what we're really talking about. Remember the concept of getting along, getting ahead, and predicting meaning? It translates into engagement. And engagement really is about the need to have good relationships with others. And that's what leaders are facilitating, and it's driven from their personality and the personality that they create as part of the team. The good leaders are fostering that friendship. They're fostering that collaboration on the team. Engagement's not with the organization. You've heard the line probably 1,000 times. People don't quit the organization, they quit their boss. And that's true. If you look at the exit survey data that's readily available, people will say, I'm not quitting the company, I'm quitting my management, I'm quitting the team, I'm quitting the work group. I love the company.
And if that is one of the key coaching conversation topics, managing your terrible boss. Comes up all the time.
Yeah. Bad leaders, it's how do I divide and conquer? How do I break this team apart so that I've got faction A, faction B? We hear this a lot. You'll hear a leader say, well, I like to mix things up on the team just to keep it interesting. I like to keep things moving around so they never quite know what I'm going to do next. I just look at those people, I'm like, oh my gosh, gee whiz, really? Well, it's got to stay exciting. For who? But yet you have people like that just really make bad decisions. Second thing about engagement, so that was getting along. This is getting ahead. It's fostering a sense of the team can be successful. It's taking the I out of the equation. It's not about the success of the boss, it's about the success of the team. So it's about how does the team contribution really move the organization forward? How will the team be recognized and rewarded across the organization? Bad leaders, it's about look at me, look at my promotion. Hey guys, this is going to get me to the next level and I'll bring you along with me. That is a statement that immediately leads to disengagement because it disenfranchises the rest of the team. And then the third thing, it's engagement by creating meaning. It's helping communicate the purpose. So good leaders are communicating the vision, they're communicating the values, and they're communicating the purpose of what the team is there to do and what they're trying to do from a performance perspective. How does this fit together in a model? And then I promise we're almost done. We call it the value chain. And that is personality drives the behavior of a leader. Typically, that behavior is around structure and consideration. Specifically, it targets staff morale. Staff morale drives engagement. You have some organizations, some people that are just energized and happier than others. I go to customer service organizations first. When you walk into certain stores, you can tell their staff's happy because they've got great bosses. They meet you at the door. How are you doing? Welcome. Can I help you find anything? What else can I do for you today? And what do you do as a customer? You come back. What do you do with your friends? You tell them, go shop there. Right? In the U.S., I refuse to fly American Airlines. Why? Because they say, sit down, shut up, and put your stuff in the locker. I fly Southwest Airlines if I'm flying inside the States. Why? Because, they have fun. You get on, and they're enjoyable. They're helping you out. They're asking you where you're going. They offer you a free drink. Whatever they want to do. Because they have flexibility. It's driven by good management. Personality values. Some of you talked about values and drivers when I asked you about personality. It's about rewards and sanctions. Some people can work at Google, other people can work at IBM because of their values and drivers. There's some people that couldn't work at either based on the values and drivers of those two companies, the work environments. Some of you wouldn't be cut out for those two different environments. Well, that's the type of culture, though, that has been created, and it's the type of culture that you as a leader endorse. We talked about unconscious biases in some of the comments, or the biases that we create in some of the comments from the earlier session. As a leader, our own personal values drive our unconscious biases. Well, that plays out in how engaged our team will be with us. That culture drives engagement, and that could be around the financial aspects of the organization, what we pay attention to, what we reward, what we punish. That drives business unit performance as well. And then finally, decision-making, personality, decisions. How do we react to them? Are we overly defensive? Do we not make them because we're afraid of failure? Strategy and staffing are typically the number one thing we see. And then again, do we have the right people doing the right things in the right ways? That's going to drive engagement as well, ultimately leading to the success of the organization. So, bottom line, personality of the CEO. If you look at all the leadership research that's been done correctly, and this was what Jim Collins found in Good to Great, most determinant profitability, or most determinant factor in the profitability of the organization in the long run was the personality of the CEO. Bottom line. And yes, there are occasional blips on the radar, aka Steve Jobs. And how do you explain those? Really good people underneath him. So, well-run companies, significantly more profitable. Good management starts at the top. This is common sense. Good leaders are in charge, everyone wins. When bad leaders are in charge, you get things like the financial crisis in the U.S. that has a worldwide ripple effect. So how do we build the case? Effectiveness of organizations. That's talking about schools, religious organizations, political organizations, social organizations. It drives the wellness of their members. If you've got bad people, regardless of the type of organization, trying to make decisions and not engaging people, you're going to have bad outcomes. Leadership is a function of personality. We know a lot about personality, and we can talk to people about it. I'm not trying to change who you are. I'm trying to make you more aware of the you that we know. We're trying to make you more aware of your reputation, because I can easily help you understand the impact that you have on the people around you. And then through coaching, because last year, 9.7 billion euro was spent in the European market just on executive development. 9.7 billion euro was spent just on executive development. I can put in place just some slight modifications to where a leader that walks in who is more command and control can sit there, put their watch on their other wrist so it's uncomfortable for them, and maybe not tell people what they want, but ask a simple question to where their team actually contributes. Just simple things, but unless people are more strategically self-aware, you're going to continue to have these challenges in teams that aren't engaged along the way with the organization. Bottom line, organizations that make the fewest mistakes are going to win. And that's just a historical fact. You look at organizations that are more successful, they make less mistakes, and they make less mistakes at the leadership level. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
Yeah, the model interpersonal business leadership.
Yeah.
For me, the interpersonal thing, I mean, you either have integrity or you don't. I think that's something that people don't learn in adulthood.
Yeah.
I would think that as you go up, things are more learnable. And this is the foundation that's there now.
That's true. There are some characteristics that you either have or don't. It's really on or off. And what we find is with all the research that's been done on personality in Hogan, outside of Hogan, you're talking personality is really, crystallized by 17 to 19 years of age. And so, people who say, I'm going to change my personality, no, you're not. My line is, if you want a new personality, go get new parents and start over. Okay? I've been trying to change my, we call it prudence, it's about impulsivity, impulse control. I've been trying to change my prudence score I've been at Hogan for 19 years. I've been trying to change it for the last 17. it stays the same or it goes down. So, I take the HPI every 2 years. So, one thing that I did want to offer you guys, the judgment, we've got an assessment that ties to judgment. It's been out now for about 18 months. We're really interested in collecting some European data, just from the standpoint of getting feedback. For your personal use, not asking for any other data. Love to offer you, if you're interested, just drop Julie a note and we'll get you out an ID. Once you take the assessment, you can log back in and retrieve your own report. But we'd be happy to do that for you, just so that you can experience it and see what judgment's all about. We think it's an interesting tool that might be interesting for you from a coaching perspective as well. So thought I'd offer that as well. So you bet.